How much more can you inference per second? Inference. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Mere Morpheus podcast live here on the 10th of March 2025. I'm your host Kyrin, and as you might surmise, this is the podcast where I dive into the technicalities of the Hermes 3 Llama 3.18b.q8_0.0. Okay, no, we're not going to do that. We're definitely not going to be getting into technicalities today, even though the topic is very much on it. So we're going to be taking a high-level overview of the compute bucket, one of the 4 C's in the Morpheus project. What is it? How can one participate in it? What is its purpose? Where are we at now? What might be coming in the future? And just its changing role in the Morpheus environment as a whole. So let's jump into the compute. The compute is too damn high, and there's a lot of competition going on for compute at the moment. If you're concerned, I guess, for AI in general, it's like, oh, DeepSeek's going to come out and we're not going to need GPUs. We're not going to do any of this. It was too much. That's incorrect. There's definitely, the way technology works is you build out a lot of it, it gets cheaper, so then people can use it more, so therefore you need more, and that cycle just repeats over and over and over again. So there's a lot of competition for compute going on at the moment. Now, as I've talked about previously, it's one of the 4 buckets of the Morpheus ecosystem. 24% of the tokens go to it over time, are distributed to people providing these compute resources. And pretty much you can just think of this as people with GPUs and fancy computers. You'll get rewarded not only for the amount of compute that you provide to the ecosystem. And why do you need it? Well, if you are running agents, decentralized agents, they need access to inference, i.e. the kind of token, the message request being sent back and forth to these LLMs. And that this needs to be provided by someone, and it's got to be through a service. It can be a centralized place, I guess, but in terms of the whole decentralized infrastructure of Morpheus, you'd want to have a kind of a marketplace, I guess, of decentralized compute. So it's determined not by only the amount that you provide, but kind of the quality of it. And this is determined by the people who actually want to use it as well. So you need both the supply of compute, and then also the demand on the other side, and they've got to interact. And I definitely see the demand side for AI agents coming in the future, and why you need particular ones which are coming from a more decentralized place, because I just don't think the ones that we'd actually want to use and are really useful are going to come from the centralized companies, because they're not going to let you have access to wallets. They're not going to be able to let you do a whole lot of things, which I think the ones from the decentralized world would. But in any case, let's say like I'm a person here. I've got my little gaming laptop that I use for podcasting, and I've actually only got half a GPU here because it was like the mothering board or the soldering board or something screwed up on one of them. So I'm running on half a GPU, and let's say I wanted to provide this as compute. Well, it's not going to be that attractive because it's slow. It's offline a lot of the time. I close my computer and I use it for other resources, so it's going to degrade in quality, and I'm just not providing a whole lot of it as well. So if I tried to connect to the network and provide compute, it's not going to get well. So I'm not going to get rewarded for it. So it's going to be very much dependent on the market demand for AI models, which I think is booming. Some might need a continuous drip feed of small amount. Some might need these high adrenaline doses of compute coming in. And Bowtied Bluefin in the Discord, nice name, puts it like this: rewards are purely based on usage of your compute rather than your availability within the node. If consumers choose to create sessions with you. This is based generally on your rankings, and so there will be a ranking system. This being based on bid/price, compute TPS, transactions per second, compute TTFT, time to first token, number completed successful sessions, etc., etc. This is me talking now. The ranking system is going to be very important in terms of how compute is measured and who is providing good quality and therefore getting rewarded by the Morpheus ecosystem. Anyone can be a provider, but not everyone will have demand, and thus rewards flow to them. With that being said, if consumers come in and look for a cheaper session that has smaller compute, then there could be definitely demand for the basic build. Cool. All right, I think that's a pretty good explanation of just why this is needed, what is wanted. Let's get into the nuts and bolts. And no memes here, unfortunately. This is the serious portion. So from the GitHub, at the simplest level, the compute node employs a proxy router that functions as an information transfer mechanism and helps create a marketplace for consumer/provider transactions. Both parties host this proxy router, which is used to, or router, I'm not sure how people say that, which is used to create sessions or engagements to send and receive prompts. Okay, so what you can see on your little screen here is you might have a consumer. They'll have more staking to access compute. They'll create a session with a model or a provider subnet, send prompts to the provider. This is me actually using it or using an agent. I'll receive, this will go to the provider who will receive the prompt, execute within the LLM, and then I will get this back. And the provider themselves will have registered a subnet and creating a bid to offer compute resources. So this is where the marketplace comes in. There's also another diagram just below this, which I think kind of helps out in seeing what the individual is probably like one of the cleanest I've seen of the Morpheus ecosystem as a whole, which is showing how the distribution of the token goes out to Capital Coders community, and it should show compute there as well. How the AI model is actually probably provided by the provider and not by the user. They just want to access this thing. Goes through a session router, and then there's all of these other little accesses showing how these the router is providing this go between the provider and the actual user. So in my analogy, I guess the nuts would be the proxy router. Jeez, I probably should have. I'm going to just say router from now on, known as the Lumerin model. And the bolts would be how the prompts, aka inferences per second, go through here. I'm not technical. I'll give that right at the start here. So I'm not going to even try to explain how the Morpheus-Lumerin model works. The Lumerin network was created by Ryan Codron, and it was basically to decentralize hash power on the BTC network. That was the original purpose of it, and I think still actually works like that. Based on all of good things of not having a single point of failure, one software solution, minimal on-chain transactions, and getting towards the Morpheus side of thing, blockchain agnostic, node security, etc., etc. There's another Morpheus podcast called Brain Power, definitely worth checking out, especially episode 7 if you want to hear an interview with him. And he mentions how BTC decentralized compute is easier because they all use this thing called Stratum and the Stratum protocol, and there's a little actual data being transferred if you want to distribute your hash power or decentralize your hash power. With the Morpheus, it's a bit different because you're having to send inferences, and so there is a little bit more data being transferred back and forth here. But letting anyone provide GPU compute and keeping its purposes / use anonymous, which is also really important in this context, is much harder. So decentralized compute is possible. It's just very, very hard to actually get going. And this is probably one of the sections of the Morpheus ecosystem that I think is taking the longest to kind of tick up to actually get some adoption, to actually get people using it. It needs a lot more work in the back end rather than something like the capital contracts, which were being used at the start, or people creating front ends in the builder community, or even just coders creating, all of the websites, all of the additional things related to Morpheus. So it's certainly one of the harder portions of the whole network. And speaking of Inference, do you know yellow trumps white in the color scheme? Or maybe yellow bolts are better than white bolts? You can see I'm struggling for jokes here because this is the serious section. But this is one of the differences, I guess, between the white paper, probably one of the main ones actually, which had a lot more details about how compute would actually work, and it was talking about sending tokens, the More token back and forth as kind of like the bidding process or paying for things. Instead, what we use now is the Yellowstone compute model, which was created by Eric Voorhees and probably some other people at Venice as well. So instead of paying for your compute with more, you're staking your more and pointing at where you'd actually direct it. And this is the kind of staking rewards are what goes to paying things. So once again, this is actually too technical for me. But the point is to maintain privacy of prompts and minimize on-chain transactions while still allowing anyone anywhere in the world to access compute, as long as they are kind of participating in the network and paying for it with the Morpheus token, which is one of the whole points of having this token. So I think we're a bit discordant right now. Where are we at? Well, shit, I actually have no idea. So I've trawled through a lot of the compute subnet on the Morpheus Discord, and there's been some updates here and there. Well, lots of talk in there over the last year or so. I can tell you what has happened. So there was a compute testnet that started in June 2024 on Arbitrum Sepolia testnet, I guess. And Ryan Condren gave some updates at the end of August before the compute mainnet went live on the 18th of November 2024. So it is actually live now. It's had a couple of audits, and people have managed to get some sort of hardware running on there and providing compute for there. The only dashboard at the moment is the testnet one, which is kind of defunct. It's just showing no one using it, because of course, why would you use the testnet if the mainnet's live? So I actually have no idea how many people are providing compute, how much is being provided, all those sorts of things are like a little bit of a black box to me. Asking around, I wasn't able to find out either. So I'm not sure. Not sure is where we're at now. So discordant is a good way to put it. So it's morphin time. If you're beginning to morph, stand back. How do you actually start to provide compute if you want to participate in this? Well, the first caveat is that it's not really meant for hobbyists. Like I said, me with my little shitty computer, or even funnier if I tried to use my like old MacBook from like 2010, I think, we're not going to have a good time. No one's going to want to use it. It would be essentially useless, worse than useless. So I'm sure it would just tie up resources and I would break things. So it's really for dedicated machine with uptime if you're looking to provide and to get a good reputation on the marketplace. The TLDR of this from the GitHub would be something like this, or Gitbook. Run a Morpheus-Lumerin node on a computer and make sure your ports are configured for inbound traffic. Download and configure the model you want to provide. Register as a provider in the on-chain provider registry. Claim rewards periodically from the session router contract. So there's a couple of things just to note here. Because this is still early, it's not as permissionless as one might hope. So to make it easy, and once again to stop farming, as we saw in one of the last episodes, there's two things in place: the plug-and-play models as well as the subnets. So the models themselves are easy, and you provide compute for people using a certain type of open source model. So this could be the Mistral 7B Instruct v0.3.iq1_m, or that Hermes one I listed at the start, or there's a whole bunch of others which people can provide. So this is the actual model that people would want to use. And I think in the future, it might even connect to the agents themselves, and it's like a user wants to use an agent, and the compute provider could actually provide that as well. Or it could be the kind of three-way thing that we see, which is, user wants to use an agent, so they connect to the agent, and then the agent is the one accessing the compute. So how that'll actually work, we'll see. Those that I listed off were seemingly popular in the testnet, so are likely being used right now as well. Now, the next step, I guess, is once again to stop farming, like we saw in the capital bucket. So this is, once again, getting into the technical stuff I'm not so great at. You might need 10K more stake to be a subnet provider. What's the difference between a subnet and a provider? From what I gather, only subnets get paid directly from the protocol. Providers can get paid directly from staked more of people who want to compute. but then providers can be part of a subnet. I'm not too sure of how that works. Hardware and software are, it's funny, like you'd think software would be more frustrating because you can get bugs. It's kind of like you don't know how exactly it works. You have to go crawling in, trying to find like, where's this fucking bug? I've got to find this thing. I certainly get pissed off when stuff doesn't work on my computer and it's just like, why aren't you working? But what's even worse is hardware, man. I hate dealing with shit that just breaks. So I'm probably the worst technologist out. I certainly wouldn't ever claim myself to be one because problems related to technology just piss me off. So this is kind of like also getting towards that area of Bitcoin where, you know, I'm diving in, I'm learning more about it, and then I just get to this point where it's like, okay, SHA-256, okay, there's, you know, crypto elliptic curves and shit like this, and I just tap out. I go like, there's smarter people who can do better jobs at this of explaining it. I'm sure it's very important. Do I need to know this to, you know, be confident in this network's working? No, I'm just gonna have to put my trust in other people. In this case, that the things are actually working, how they're working. So Morphin out. That's probably the closest I'm gonna come to explaining compute ever again. What if there's more to come? What if there's more to come? So what does the future hold, I guess, for this bucket? There's been some suggestion, hints, maybe even theories, as conspiracy Keanu is looking very confused here. You could have more compute borrowing and lending. So in terms of, instead of just providing things, you could actually have like a market on top of a market related to compute borrowing and lending. So if you wanted to develop something without actually exposure to the more token price, as one in the chat here is saying, more to the moon, maybe, who knows? I don't encourage that type of talk on here. You could do this as well. Eventually, maybe a centralized, decentralized compute could come here. So you'd, I guess, eventually want to see the likes of Akash, BitTensor, all those sorts of decentralized compute places, or the infrastructure decentralization, I guess, is what they're doing. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't dived into those projects particularly. That would also play into this as well. So that's, I guess, my little summary here. Ain't nobody got time for that. Morpheus AI compute. What? Kyrin, you haven't done a good job of explaining this to me and convincing me why this is important and why this needs to happen. Oh Lord Jesus, it's a fire. My bronchitis. So you might be getting a bit tired after this and thinking like, dang, isn't Grok easier just to use? Why is this even important? And you know what? If this was solely based on text LLMs, sure, there's the problems, I guess, you're seeing of those being censored and the lack of privacy. But even then, there's open source models out there like Venice. You know, why is this even important? And if it was just related to LLMs, I'd probably be inclined to say, yeah, why does Morpheus need to have its own compute, decentralized compute and things like this? And who knows, even in the future, this could change, just because like I have no idea what's going on there. So, you know, is it even being used? Is it even that important? I'm leaving that into hands of other people. What are the things that I can say though is that, and especially because people don't care about privacy. I think that's been well established in general, and it's more about the UI and UX. So the open source models are likely to be, the closed source are likely to be faster and nicer and easier to use. The big draw in my mind of why somebody should have time for that is the AI agents themselves. And I think it's just, you probably need this central component to work in with all of these things, in terms of the capital providers, in terms of the incentives for people to create the agents, and then for the coders to actually work on these things, and, you know, UI, UX, front end, and things like that. It's one of those ones where it's kind of like, Bitcoin nodes and mining in essence. So nodes in particular. How many people have nodes? There's like tens of thousands, if that, securing what is it now? $2 trillion network or something like that. Like most people, I actually was tempted to create a node for myself, a Lightning node in particular, which ends up having to be a full node. And this was very important to me because of the podcasting 2.0, being able to receive payments directly via Lightning within the podcasting apps. If you haven't seen any of that, it's definitely worth trying out an app like Fountain and seeing how you can connect with your favorite content creators directly via that way. On the audio side of things, with YouTube and video, it's a bit different. And I almost bought a Raspberry Pi. I almost started doing this, and then I realized, like, dude, I don't want to deal with liquidity channels. I don't want to have to deal with this thing overheating. I don't want to have to deal with like even the miniature amount of noise that comes from a Raspberry Pi, and the fan, and making sure it's working all the time. What do I do when I travel overseas for months at a time? And so I ended up just going like, this is fucking stupid. I'm not going to do this. It makes no sense for me to do this. And I think most people come to this conclusion, yet the nodes are a critical part in the way that Bitcoin works. And so even though it's like technical, it's hard to use, and it's not going to be important for the vast majority of people, I get the feeling this is one of those things where it's like, this actually does need to work, and you need to have at least some people, enough to make it decentralized, to form part of the backbone of the whole network. And that's kind of how I view the compute side of things. So I actually you'll notice I do this a lot, comparing an aspect of Morpheus to Bitcoin. And it's one of those ones where it's like, just because it's similar doesn't mean it's going to take off, go to the moon, as Juan has said in the chat here. But I also do think that the more similarities a network has, it can actually provide, it's an indication of more sustainability of something that'll actually be useful and used. And this is why I still continue, even though there's things in this project which I don't understand, which I still kind of don't like. Like, I don't like that I can't see the compute stats and how it's going easily. That's fine. That's one of those things that it's just worth monitoring and seeing in the future. And if it continues like that, then I'll start to get a bit concerned and being like, okay, what's actually going on here? Especially because 24% of the rewards go out to this bucket. But there are times where it's like, I have to tap out. I can't personally add more into this, and me trying to learn more about this would either take a ridiculous amount of time, of me spending on time that I don't actually enjoy. Like, I trawling through the GitHub and trying to understand the Lumerin model was not fun for me. This week's episode was certainly, I made more memes this week because it kept me sane after trying to actually understand this stuff. But I think that is kind of my overview of the compute bucket, and I hope that's helped provide some value to you, because it certainly wasn't super valuable for me to try to dive into all of these things. So we're going to end this episode here today a little bit shorter than normal. This is a value for value podcast. For any of the value I provided today, I hope that you got some. I really hope you do. I just ask that you can provide that back. This channel itself, the Mere Morpheus, it is run on the value for value, and in particular, I am very against advertising. I'm very against sponsorships. I'm very against any sort of form of monetization in particular that will affect my judgments of how I view this podcast, of the network, the information that I provide you. So that does mean, and I want this available anytime, anywhere, for anyone, anyhow. That does mean, though, that I ask for some value back in return for what I've given you here. You can do this in many different ways: time, talent, and treasure. So sharing this with a friend, word of mouth, spreading the word of this podcast helps out. Just more eyes on it, more ears on it, gives me more feedback. It actually does make the show better, funnily enough. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy and cycle. Giving a sub, providing feedback, joining in on the live 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on a Monday, like Juan did here. Talent, I've got graphics. If you are a meme curator, if you want to help play a part in the show, produce the show with me, I'd love for you to join in. Maybe you'd want to touch the music. Maybe you would have suggestions on how I can improve things, on how you could contribute on topics. Hell, even when I'm in the Discord and asking questions, replying to those and giving me answers to that is very, very useful and valuable, much like Anton has and David David Johnston, Smart Agents on Discord have. They've been very helpful, so thank you very much to them. And then finally, you can send some more my way. I do have a link down in below of that referral link, which I'll keep referring to. There's also PayPal, and I mentioned on Fountain, you can send Lightning via that way, or stream Lightning payments of Bitcoin to me, and also send a message at the same time. So any of those ways are very much appreciated. If you do that, let me know so I can shout you out in the episode as well. I will let you know the podcast does look. I'm going to be traveling in May, so there's going to be a bit of an end date in anyhow, at least for the season 1. But if I don't get any value back from this podcast, I'm going to assume that people don't find it valuable, and so I might not kick it off again afterwards. So there's one of those ones where it's a give and take here, people. Like, if you enjoyed it, if you want to see more, I need to know that you're consuming it. There's nothing worse than being a podcaster and talking into the black box and it just going nowhere. And unless people let me know that they found it valuable via any of the methods that I just said, I'm just going to assume it's not valuable and so would end the podcast that way. So what's coming up in future episodes? So I've got 2 more episodes on the coding and on the community builders. I'll do a tokenomics one, and then I think I'll probably have a couple more. So something on atomic governments, something on how there's no team, probably open source, and then separating AI from crypto. And that'll probably just about wrap me up for this season 1 of Mere Morpheus. So tune in for all of those. Thank you very much for everyone who's helped to contribute and participate. And until next week, ciao for now. Kyrin out. Bye.